The spotlights blazed down on Oprah Winfrey as she stood center stage at the National Policy Forum, her signature confidence on full display in her elegant purple pantsuit. The crowd of policy experts, media personalities, and political figures watched in anticipation as America's most beloved talk show host prepared to deliver her much-advertised lecture on American Values in Crisis. Behind the curtain, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood silently, her navy blue suit crisp and professional, scrolling through her phone with laser focus. Her staff had just forwarded her the transcript of Oprah's opening remarks that had been released to select media. What she read made her blood boil. Oprah was about to misrepresent her voting record and policy positions completely. Just moments earlier, the moderator had introduced Winfrey with glowing praise. The voice of a generation, a self-made billionaire who understands America's struggles. The audience erupted in applause as Oprah began her opening statement, her voice resonating through the hall. Our politicians have failed us. Representatives like Jasmine Crockett are pushing policies that divide rather than unite us. Crockett's eyes narrowed as she watched the monitor backstage. Her press secretary leaned in. They didn't tell us she'd be targeting you directly. Crockett nodded, a calm determination settling over her features. It's fine, I've brought receipts. This wasn't just another political forum. This was about to become the moment when Jasmine Crockett, the rising star from Texas, would teach Oprah Winfrey that celebrity status doesn't shield you from accountability. What happened next would leave the entire audience speechless and change the trajectory of both women's public images forever. Before we dive deeper into this incredible showdown, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more explosive political confrontations that the mainstream media won't show you. The massive convention center hummed with anticipation, smartphones raised throughout the crowd, all eyes fixed on Oprah Winfrey. For decades, she had been America's comforter-in-chief, the billionaire talk show host whose rags-to-riches story had inspired millions. Today, however, she wasn't here to give away cars or interview celebrities. She was here to speak on what she called the political division destroying America's soul. Winfrey paced the stage with practiced precision, her voice carrying the same emotional weight that had made her a household name. I've spent my life listening to Americans from all walks of life, she began, her hands gesturing emphatically. And what I hear now frightens me. Politicians like Representative Crockett have abandoned the middle ground. They speak in absolutes, villainize the opposition, and refuse to acknowledge when they're wrong. The large screens flanking the stage displayed carefully selected clips of Crockett in congressional hearings, edited to make her passionate advocacy appear aggressive and unreasonable. The audience, largely composed of Winfrey's loyal followers and centrist political figures, nodded along as Oprah continued. Just last month, Representative Crockett blocked a bipartisan bill that would have helped working families because it didn't go far enough, Oprah declared, shaking her head with disappointment. This all-or-nothing approach is why Washington can't function anymore. Backstage, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was a study in controlled fury. At 44, Crockett had built her reputation as a formidable attorney and civil rights advocate long before entering Congress. The Harvard law graduate had fought countless battles in courtrooms across Texas, defending voting rights and challenging systemic inequalities. Politics wasn't a career move for her. It was an extension of her lifelong commitment to justice. Her chief of staff handed her a tablet showing social media already exploding with, "Oprah wisdom trending. They've been planning this hit job for weeks," he whispered. "Our sources say she hasn't even read the bill she's criticizing you for opposing." Crockett scrolled through her phone, pulling up the actual text of the legislation Oprah had mentioned. "She's either deliberately lying or completely misinformed," Crockett murmured, her voice steady despite her rising frustration. That bill had a poison pill amendment that would have stripped protections from the communities that need them most. "We didn't oppose help for families, we opposed the hidden cuts to existing programs." A production assistant approached nervously. "Congressman, you'll be introduced in 3 minutes. Ms. Winfrey's team has requested that you limit your responses to the pre-approved questions." Crockett smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure they did." She straightened her jacket and checked her reflection in a nearby mirror. This wasn't just about defending her record anymore. This was about standing up to the dangerous oversimplification of complex issues by celebrities who wielded enormous influence without the corresponding responsibility. "The audience doesn't know what's coming." her press secretary said with concern. "Neither does Oprah," Crockett replied, sliding her phone into her pocket where she'd saved screenshots of Winfrey's contradictory statements over the years. But they're all about to learn that soundbites and edited clips don't hold up against facts and receipts. As the moderator announced her name, Jasmine Crockett took a deep breath. The stakes couldn't be higher. This wasn't merely a personal defense, but a stand for political integrity in an era of celebrity influence and media manipulation. The audience's applause was noticeably cooler as Jasmine Crockett walked onto the stage with measured steps. Oprah extended her hand with a camera-ready smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The contrast between the two women was immediately striking. Winfrey with her billion-dollar empire and carefully crafted public persona, Crockett with her legal precision and unwavering directness. "Representative Crockett, thank you for joining us today," Oprah began, gesturing toward the empty chair across from her. "I think we can all agree that finding common ground is essential in today's divided political landscape." Crockett took her seat, adjusting her microphone with calm deliberation. "Thank you, Ms. Winfrey. I agree that common ground is important when it's built on facts rather than misrepresentations." A slight murmur rippled through the audience. This wasn't the deferential tone most guests took with Oprah. Winfrey tilted her head with practiced concern. "That sounds like you're already taking offense before we've even begun our conversation. Is this the kind of defensiveness that makes compromise so difficult in Congress?" The audience shifted uncomfortably as the tension escalated faster than anyone had anticipated. Crockett didn't take the bait. "I'm not defensive, Ms. Winfrey. I'm direct, and I think your audience deserves directness about the claims you made before bringing me on stage." She turned slightly toward the audience. "Ms. Winfrey suggested that I block a bipartisan bill that would have helped working families. What she failed to mention is that this so-called bipartisan bill included an amendment that would have cut child care subsidies for over 300,000 families in order to fund a tax break for corporations." Oprah's smile tightened as she attempted to regain control of the narrative. "Well, politics is about compromise, isn't it? Sometimes we need to—" "Compromise doesn't mean sacrificing the most vulnerable," Crockett interjected, her voice firm but measured. "And I wonder if your audience knows that your production company would have benefited from those same tax breaks." A collective gasp went through the crowd. The moderator tried to intervene. "Perhaps we should focus on—" "No," Crockett said, holding up a hand. "I think transparency matters." Ms. Winfrey positioned this as a conversation about American values, but didn't disclose her financial interest in the policies she's promoting. The large screens behind them, originally programmed to show only pre-selected clips, suddenly displayed Crockett's own slides, financial documents highlighting Oprah's investments in companies that stood to gain from the legislation. Backstage, Crockett's digital team had overridden the forum's planned presentation. The technical director frantically tried to switch back to the original program, but the damage was done. The audience could clearly see the conflict of interest. Winfrey's famous composure cracked slightly. "This is highly inappropriate. We're here to have a civil discussion about bringing Americans together, not to make accusations." "Civil doesn't mean unchallenged," Crockett responded, her voice gaining strength. "And bringing Americans together requires honesty about who benefits from the policies being discussed." The moderator, visibly flustered, attempted to steer the conversation back to script. "Let's discuss the broader issue of political division." "I'd be happy to," Crockett nodded, pulling out her phone. "In fact, I have some interesting quotes from Ms. Winfrey over the years that demonstrate this exact problem." She held up the screen, showing a compilation of contradictory statements Winfrey had made about political compromise and corporate responsibility. Oprah's team signaled frantically from offstage, making cutting motions with their hands. A producer rushed to whisper something in the moderator's ear. "We'll need to take a short break," the moderator announced abruptly. "Are we breaking because I'm presenting facts?" Crockett asked, her eyebrow raised. The microphones caught her question before they were cut, sending another ripple through the increasingly uncomfortable audience. As the house lights came up for an unscheduled intermission, social media exploded. Closeted Crockett's began trending, alongside Oprah Exposed. Clips of the confrontation spread like wildfire across platforms, with viewers divided between shock at seeing Oprah challenged and admiration for Crockett's preparedness. Backstage, Oprah's team huddled in crisis mode. "This is not what we agreed to," her chief publicist hissed at the event organizer. "She was supposed to stick to the approved topics." Meanwhile, Crockett calmly sipped water in her green room, reviewing additional notes. "They'll try to cut my mic when we return," she told her staff. "Make sure our backup plan is ready." When the intermission ended, the atmosphere in the hall had transformed. The audience that had arrived expecting Oprah's trademark inspiration was now on the edge of their seats for a real political showdown. And Jasmine Crockett was just getting started. As the cameras prepared to roll again, Oprah's team distributed a hastily revised format to all parties. The new rules were clear. The moderator would ask questions. Each speaker would have 2 minutes to respond, no interruptions. It was damage control, pure and simple. But when they returned to the stage, Crockett had brought something unexpected, a stack of folders containing printed copies of her evidence, which she began distributing to the journalists in the front row. "What are you doing?" Oprah asked, her microphone catching the question, despite the fact that they weren't supposed to be live yet. Crockett looked directly at her, ensuring the truth doesn't get lost in the editing room. The red lights on the cameras blinked on, and the battle entered its next, more explosive phase. The production team scrambled to regain control as the live broadcast resumed. The moderator, visibly tense, attempted to reset the conversation with a neutral question about infrastructure investment, but the damage was done. The confrontational tone had been set, and millions of viewers who had tuned in for Oprah's wisdom were now witnessing something unprecedented: America's beloved media queen being genuinely challenged. "Before we move on," Crockett said calmly, "I think we need to address the elephant in the room. Ms. Winfrey made specific claims about my voting record that are demonstrably false, and I believe your audience deserves the truth." Oprah's famous warm smile had cooled considerably. "I think we've moved beyond that point in our discussion, Congresswoman. Let's focus on solutions rather than accusation." "Accountability isn't an accusation," Crockett replied, her voice steady. "And solutions built on misinformation won't help anyone." She turned toward the audience. "I respect Ms. Winfrey's achievements immensely. Her rise from poverty to become one of the most influential women in the world is genuinely inspiring. But influence comes with responsibility, especially when discussing policy that affects millions of Americans." A murmur of agreement rippled through parts of the audience. Oprah sensed the shift and attempted to reclaim the narrative with her trademark emotional appeal. "What the American people want," Winfrey began, her voice taking on the inspirational cadence that had become her hallmark, "is for their leaders to put aside petty differences and work together. I've interviewed presidents and paupers, celebrities and everyday heroes, and what I've learned is that our common humanity—" "With all due respect," Crockett interjected, "what the American people want is the truth." She reached into her folder and held up a document. "This is the actual language of the bill you criticize me for opposing. Section 4.3 specifically eliminated healthcare provisions for vulnerable communities, while Section 11.9 created new tax advantages for media conglomerates, including your own." The screen behind them suddenly displayed the highlighted sections of the legislation as Crockett continued. "Your production company, Harpo, would have received an estimated $24.00, $7 million tax benefit from this provision. Yet you presented my opposition as simply blocking help for working families." The audience's reaction was immediate. Gasps, followed by the unmistakable buzz of people turning to their neighbors in disbelief. Oprah's expression flickered between shock and anger before settling into a tight smile. "I think you're missing the bigger picture, Congresswoman," Winfrey countered, trying to regain her footing. "Policy discussions require nuance, not—" "I couldn't agree more about nuance," Crockett nodded, her tone respectful but firm. "Which is why I was surprised when your opening remarks painted with such a broad brush." She pulled out her phone. "May I play back what you said earlier for clarity?" Before anyone could object, Crockett pressed play, and Oprah's voice filled the auditorium. "Politicians like Representative Crockett have abandoned the middle ground. They speak in absolutes, villainize the opposition, and refuse to acknowledge when they're wrong." Crockett looked directly at Winfrey. "That doesn't sound like nuance to me, Ms. Winfrey. It sounds like the exact divisive rhetoric you claim to be fighting against." The moderator attempted to intervene, but Crockett pressed on with precision. "Here's what troubles me most. Have a platform that reaches millions. When you make statements like that without proper context or factual basis, it doesn't just harm my reputation. It misleads citizens about how their government actually functions. The audience, initially solidly in Oprah's corner, had grown noticeably quiet, their attention completely captured by the unexpected direction of the forum. Winfrey, recognizing the shifting dynamic, attempted to pivot to her strength, emotional connection. "I understand your frustration, Congresswoman. Perhaps we've gotten off on the wrong foot. What I truly want is to understand your perspective. Tell us in your own words why you believe your approach is best for America." It was a masterful attempt to reset the kind of moment Oprah had used countless times to transform confrontational interviews into emotional breakthroughs. But Crockett wasn't there for an Oprah moment. "I appreciate that, Ms. Winfrey, but this isn't about my feelings or your feelings. It's about accuracy." She turned to face the audience directly. "When celebrities with enormous platforms make political statements, they have a responsibility to be informed. The bill in question would have helped some working families, yes, at the expense of others. It would have funded new programs by cutting existing ones that serve our most vulnerable communities." She paused, allowing her words to sink in before delivering her most powerful point. "And here's what your audience might find most surprising. 3 weeks before taking this public position, your investment team purchased significant shares in companies that would benefit directly from these changes." Crockett held up financial disclosure documents with highlighted sections. "The same companies that sponsored this very forum." The room erupted. Journalists in the front row began photographing the documents Crockett had distributed earlier. Oprah's team rushed from backstage, signaling frantically to the production crew. "This is inappropriate and potentially libelous," Winfrey responded, real anger breaking through her composed facade. "You're making serious accusations based on circumstantial connections. These are public records, Ms. Winfrey," Crockett replied calmly. "SEC filings, congressional records, and your own public statements. Nothing I've presented isn't verifiable." The moderator, looking increasingly distressed, attempted to call for another break, but Crockett wasn't finished. "The American people deserve representatives who vote based on policy impact, not popularity. And they deserve media figures who do their homework before using their platforms to shape public opinion." She looked directly into the camera. "Dialogue matters, accountability matters, and facts matter most of all." The production director, following desperate signals from Oprah's team, cut to an unscheduled commercial break, but it was too late. The live stream had captured everything, and clips were already spreading across social media platforms with hashtags like Crockett, a seats challenge, and Oprah accountable trending nationwide. In less than 15 minutes, Jasmine Crockett had done what few had ever managed. She had challenged Oprah Winfrey on her own stage and brought receipts that couldn't be dismissed. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had been completely upended. As the commercial break extended far beyond its scheduled time, backstage had become a war room. Oprah's team huddled around her, advisors urgently whispering strategy options. 20 feet away, Crockett stood alone, calmly reviewing her notes as if this were just another day in congressional hearings. The production team announced that the forum would resume in 2 minutes. When the lights came back up, everyone waited to see how America's most skilled interviewer would respond to being outmaneuvered on her own turf. The remainder of the National Policy Forum played out unlike anything viewers had expected. When the cameras returned from the extended commercial break, Oprah Winfrey had visibly regrouped. Her decades of media experience hadn't failed her. She knew when a strategic retreat was necessary. "Before we continue," Winfrey began, her voice carefully modulated, "I want to acknowledge something important. Congresswoman Crockett has raised some valid concerns about the accuracy of certain statements I made earlier." She turned toward Crockett with a measured nod. "While we may interpret the impact of legislation differently, I should have been more precise about the specific provisions of the bill we're discussing." It wasn't quite an apology, but the partial concession sent shockwaves through the audience. Oprah Winfrey rarely backed down. Crockett accepted the olive branch with grace. "Thank you for that clarification, Ms. Winfrey. I believe we both want what's best for the American people, even if we sometimes disagree on how to get there." The remaining 40 minutes of the forum proceeded with a notably different tone, more substantive, more nuanced, and far more equitable in terms of speaking time. But the damage to Winfrey's carefully cultivated image of infallibility had been done. As the event concluded and the cameras stopped rolling, the real story was just beginning. Within hours, Crockett checkmate became the #1 trending topic nationwide. Video clips of the exchange spread rapidly across platforms, with particular focus on the moment Crockett produced the financial documents and Oprah's visible reaction. Conservative outlets celebrated with headlines like, "Congresswoman brings receipts, leaves Oprah speechless," and "Crockett exposes celebrity politics." But surprisingly, many progressive outlets also highlighted the exchange, framing it as a necessary reminder about the responsibility that comes with media influence. When celebrities wade into policy, a lesson in preparation. Political analysts across the spectrum weighed in on the significance of the moment. On CNN, a panel discussion broke down the confrontation. "What we witnessed today wasn't just a politician defending her record," noted veteran political correspondent Jessica Winters. "It was a fundamental challenge to how celebrities influence policy discussions in America." Congresswoman Crockett came armed with facts, documents, and specifics, essentially bringing a legislative approach to what was supposed to be an emotional appeal. Her fellow panelist, Marcus Johnson, nodded agreement. "Winfrey has interviewed presidents, dictators, and titans of industry, but I've never seen her quite so thoroughly unprepared for a guest. The question now is how this affects her political capital going forward." By evening, the story had expanded beyond the political sphere and into entertainment news. News ran a segment titled, "Oprah's Toughest Interview Yet," as the subject. Entertainment Tonight featured body language experts analyzing the confrontation moment by moment. Inside Harpo Productions, sources described a tense atmosphere as Oprah and her team conducted an emergency damage control session. One insider told Page Six she's taking this very personally. "In 37 years of broadcasting, she's never been caught off guard like this. There are serious questions being asked about who failed to properly research the Congresswoman's background and prepare appropriate responses." Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's star was rising meteorically. Her office reported that their phones had been ringing non-stop with interview requests from every major network. Her social media followers increased by over 500,000 in a single day. Political donors from across the country began reaching out to her campaign. More substantively, policy experts were now seriously engaging with the actual legislation that had sparked the confrontation. The Washington Post published a detailed analysis of the bill, largely confirming Crockett's characterization of its provisions and the potential conflicts of interest she had highlighted. 3 days after the forum, Oprah released a carefully worded statement on her social media accounts. "Throughout my career, I have always valued truth, growth, and learning. My recent exchange with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett has prompted important reflection. While I entered our discussion with good intentions, I recognize now that I had not fully engaged with the complexity of the legislation we discussed, nor had I adequately disclosed certain relevant connections. I have always believed that when we know better, we do better. This is a moment for me to do better." The statement received mixed reactions, with some praising Winfrey's accountability while others criticized it as too little, too late. But the most significant response came from an unexpected quarter. A week after the forum, a group of 23 prominent celebrities and influencers signed an open letter pledging to institute new standards for their political commentary, the Responsibility in Influence Pledge. Committed signatories to disclose potential conflicts of interest, consult with policy experts before making public statements on legislation, and distinguish clearly between personal opinion and factual claims. The lead signatory was surprising, Oprah Winfrey herself. "Sometimes our greatest growth comes from our most difficult moments," Winfrey wrote in the introduction to the pledge. "My exchange with Congresswoman Crockett revealed blind spots in my approach to discussing policy matters. Rather than simply moving on, I've chosen to learn from this experience and help establish new standards for how those of us with significant platforms engage with political issues." For Jasmine Crockett, the aftermath brought both opportunity and challenge. While her national profile had skyrocketed, so too had the intensity of attention on her every word and action. Conservative groups that had celebrated her takedown of Oprah began approaching her as a potential ally, while some progressive organizations worried about her willingness to publicly challenge one of their most powerful supporters. Crockett navigated the aftermath with the same precision she had displayed at the forum. On MSNBC's Morning Joe, she made her position clear. This wasn't about conservative versus progressive. or even about me versus Ms. Winfrey. It was about the fundamental principle that in policy discussions, accuracy matters more than influence. I have tremendous respect for what Oprah has built and the barriers she's broken. My concern was specifically with the mischaracterization of legislation that affects real people's lives. 2 weeks after the confrontation, the political landscape showed subtle but significant shifts. Media outlets began including more detailed policy explanations in their coverage. Celebrities were noticeably more cautious in their political statements, often explicitly noting that they were sharing personal opinions rather than expert analysis. The most concrete change came when the controversial bill at the center of the dispute was reintroduced in Congress with substantial amendments. The new version maintained support for working families while removing the provisions that would have cut existing programs. Most notably, the corporate tax advantages that Crockett had highlighted were completely eliminated. The bill's sponsor explicitly credited the Winfrey Crockett exchange for bringing needed attention to the legislation's flaws. Sometimes it takes a public spotlight to illuminate issues that might otherwise remain buried in legislative details, Senator Michael Thornton told reporters. The revised bill is stronger and more equitable because of that conversation. 6 months later, Jasmine Crockett delivered the keynote address at the Harvard Kennedy School's Conference on Media, Celebrity, and Political Discourse. Her speech, titled Accountability in the Age of Influence, drew a capacity crowd. The democratization of media has given more people a voice than ever before, she told the audience. But amplification without verification can undermine the very democratic principles it should strengthen. Whether you're a first-term congresswoman or a billionaire media mogul, the standard must be the same. Claims require evidence, influence demands responsibility. In the front row, nodding along with thoughtful attention, sat Oprah Winfrey. The two women were photographed in deep conversation at the reception afterward. Neither disclosed the content of their discussion, but both were smiling. 1 year to the day after their confrontation, they announced a joint initiative to create a free online course on media literacy and policy analysis, aimed at helping everyday Americans navigate the increasingly complex intersection of entertainment, information, and legislation. The first module was titled simply, Bringing Receipts: How to Verify Claims from Any Source. As for the American public, the Oprah Crockett moment had entered the cultural lexicon. Do you have the Crockett receipts for that? Became shorthand for asking someone to back up their claims with evidence. In high school debate competitions across the country, students studied the exchange as a masterclass in preparation and precision. Perhaps most significantly, a new expectation had been established in public discourse, that no platform, no matter how beloved its owner, was beyond fact-checking. And no claim, no matter how emotionally compelling its delivery, was beyond verification. What had begun as a confrontation had transformed into something more valuable, a recalibration of how influence and accountability balanced in American public life. The lesson was clear. In an era of instant communication and celebrity influence, facts still mattered. Thank you. Preparation still mattered. And as Jasmine Crockett had demonstrated in those pivotal moments on stage with one of the most powerful women in media, the courage to speak truth to power with evidence in hand mattered most of all. That's the real story behind the confrontation that changed the rules of celebrity political engagement. If you found this breakdown insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our analysis of the most consequential political moments. And let us know in the comments, what celebrity do you think needs to be fact-checked?